the sin of silence. This morning I got a letter under my door. And by the way, when you knock on the door before the service, I simply can't answer always because, I've got to sometimes talk to the Lord a little bit before the service. But anyway, a note was knocked pushed under my door this morning, and I read it a while ago. One of our ladies said, Brother Hyles, I'm burdened and concerned. She said, I went to Zayre's department store, and I'm going to call the names. And I'll be calling more names of stores in town in a few days, too, as the days come and go. She said, I went to Zayre's department store. Now, that's a family store. That's where you buy your school supplies. That's where you buy the clothes for boys and girls to go to school. That's where the common people buy clothes for growing children. That's where, how many of you have been to Zayre's department store in the last few months? Raise your hand, would you please? And she said, I noticed right in plain view a Playboy magazine. And she said, I went and asked for the manager. And I began to laugh. I went and asked for the manager. And she said, I told him, I buy things here. And this is a family store, and I bring my children in here. And I just don't think my children ought to have to look at naked women on the cover of magazines. And he said, I think he said, you're the first one that's said anything about this. Well, where are the rest of us? Obadiah? All the rest of you folks go to Zayre's department store. Are you saved? Do you belong to Jesus? Let me tell you something this morning. Let me tell you straightforward. You like it or not, doesn't matter. But until Christian people decide to stand up and be heard and speak out, the rot and garbage and filth is going to flow like a river in this area of ours. Now, brother, you're listening to somebody this morning that's about to speak out, and I'm going to call more stores by name, and we're not going to put Playboy magazines and dirty, sex-crazed magazines where our folks trade without one preacher standing up and saying, you quit trading there, unless they take... And by the way, you folks that trade at Zayre's department store, if every one of you who go there would go to the manager and tell him what you think about that kind of garbage. What he'd do, he'd lose more money losing the business in this room this morning than he would taking the dirty Playboy magazine and throwing them out the back door. Stand up! Let folks know. Now, I don't mean walk back there and take a magazine and tear it up. Like Dr. Rice preached a sermon on movies one time. I put a book out on movies, and a guy in Cincinnati, Ohio, got so incensed at the movies, what they're doing for America. He got an axe and went down to the local theater, walked upstairs right during a movie and chopped the thing in pieces. I think that's just terrible. But chopped it in pieces, got 2 years in jail because of it. And I don't think you ought to do that. But I'll tell you what, I've got more respect for fellows that will chop it in pieces than the fellows who say nothing about it. Why don't we just start a campaign this morning and say that we see grocery stores and department stores where our children have to go, and we see dirt. Let me say this. You say, what's wrong with Playboy magazine? Don't you ever say that to me out loud. I might lose my Christianity and punch you in the nose. If you don't know what's wrong with Playboy magazine, you ought to get on your face at this altar and ask God to have mercy on your wicked soul and forgive you and give you some decency and give you some morality and give you some principle. The dirty Playboy philosophy is sending this country to hell. Somebody's got to be more than some Obadiah hiding the prophets of God in a cave and feeding them on drinking water. Somebody's got to say, we'll stand for decency again in our country. But if you're not even saved, you ought to hate that kind of stuff. This morning we ought to say, everywhere we trade, we're going to take a stand and we're going to talk to the manager and voice our protest. Everybody protests except Christians. And we wear smile buttons. Anybody can dislike something and stand and fight and crusade. But somehow we've gotten the idea Christianity is not a crusade. That's not true. This Bible is one great moral revolution. That's what this Bible's all about. Stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. Lift high his royal banner. It must not suffer loss. Obadiah, disciple who was secret. But he's not the only one in the Bible. There was Nicodemus. I like Nicodemus. Feel sorry for him, but I like him. It was Nicodemus who was the teacher of the Jews, a Bible instructor, an Old Testament professor. It was Nicodemus who came to Jesus by night and talked to him and said, "We know thou art a teacher come from God." It was to Nicodemus whom our Lord spoke 3 times, "You must be born again." It was Nicodemus who went away without ever giving us any hope that he was saved, though I think he was. If you read the 7th chapter of John, you'll find that Nicodemus gave he opened the door just enough to let a little light come in to maybe make us think that he was born again. And then in the latter part of the Scriptures, when Jesus was on the cross and gave up the ghost, it was Nicodemus who came along with Joseph of Arimathea and claimed his body and wrapped his body and prepared it for burial. It was Joseph's borrowed tomb where our Lord's body was laid. But Nicodemus, all those years, wouldn't stand up for Christ. Oh, think of the chances he had. Think of the times Nicodemus could have stood up and said, "I belong to him and I want you to know it." Think of the influence Nicodemus could have had. He was a teacher of the Jews, perhaps a member of the Sanhedrin, a Bible instructor, a teacher of Judaism. He could have amounted to something, but he wouldn't stand. And his life was wasted. You know, I was thinking, a deacon in our church works at a certain plant here in this area. And I met a fellow the other day, a few years ago, who works that plant. He said, "I work at a certain place." I said, "What department?" He told me. I said, "Man, you know so-and-so?" "Sure, I know it." I called this deacon's name. I said, "Why, he's a deacon in our church." He said, "He is." "Is that right?" "I didn't know he was a Baptist. I didn't know he was a deacon. Are you sure he's a deacon?" I said, "No. I don't even know the fellow." He said, "Why, I've worked for him 17 years, and I didn't know he was a deacon." Nicodemus. Why, have you been working for a fellow 17 minutes? He ought to know you're a Christian. He ought to know you're standing for God. The very way that you work. By the way, that fellow's no longer a deacon here. And if we've got any deacons, we've got 100 deacons. If we've got any deacons, they can work in a place 17 hours or 17 days or 17 minutes. And folks don't know you belong to Jesus. You love this book. You hate sin. You stand for God. And you resign the deacon board. Very idea of God's blood-bought, blood-washed people being silent Christians. I've been pastor of this church 14 years. I will become next week the pastor who served here longer than any pastor in the 85-year history of this church. I was thinking last night of the mistakes I've made. There's some things I've said I wish I hadn't said. There's some times I've been stubborn I wish I hadn't have been. They're mistakes. And I've been hasty sometimes in some decisions. And sometimes maybe I've been a little quick. I never have tried. I've tried not to be selfish, but sometimes maybe I've been a little bit quick. And sometimes maybe I've been a little harsh when I shouldn't have been. But I said last night, I said, "Jesus, you know this is true. I've stood for you for 14 years. Nobody in town wonders what I think about you. When you mention Jack Hyles in Hammond, nobody wonders what he stand. Nobody wonders. Everybody knows. Everybody don't love him. Everybody doesn't love him. Many folks hate me, but everybody knows my stand. Everybody knows what I believe about the drinking, the liquor traffic. Everybody knows what I think about the nudity going on in our schools. Everybody knows what I think about the Playboy philosophy. It's leaked out again this morning, what I think about that. Everybody knows my stand. Everybody knows my position. And I've made my stand. If the whole town likes it, I'll stand. If the whole town hates it, I'll stand. But I'm going to stand for Jesus if I stay here 100 years. Oh, listen to me. We need some men, not like Nicodemus, who just teach the Bible and teach the Old Testament and secretly follow the Lord and are silent in their stand. We need somebody who'll stand up and be counted and say, "Lord, I'm going to stand for you." Oh, listen, I can't go to Inland Steel. Most of those men out there will never hear me preach. They've been, some of them, prejudiced, and some of them have heard stories about my preaching and my stand, and they won't come. Did you know that if we ever reach that great crowd of men at Inland Steel, that means you men that work out there have got to live what's preached from this pulpit as you work out there during the week? You've got to be a testimony. You've got to stand up for Christ. You've got to take your stand. You've got to stand for righteousness and stand against unrighteousness. Out here at Youngstown and over at Ford Motor Company and these other places, most of them won't come. You students that attend Hammond High School, or attend Hammond Tech, or attend Morton, or Gavitt, or Clark, or other schools in this area. Did you know that many of them, they know my stand? They know I hate communism. They know I fight it like I fight a rattlesnake. They know I hate the dirty mini-skirted craze where girls look like strip-teasers sitting in chairs at church. They know I hate that kind of stuff. They know my stand on long hair and the hippie crowd and communism and revolution and riots. They know my stand on nudity and free love and all the rest of it. They know my stand. They won't come here if they ever see the love of Christ. If they ever know that somebody stands for Jesus, you're going to have to show them at Gavitt and at Morton and at Hammond Tech and at Hammond High School. You're going to have to show them. There are millions of people in this area, and there are tens of thousands who will never walk through those doors. But you walk through their doors. You stand. You go to work. You go to business.